Hello, welcome to another episode of Horn Camp Connect. I'm your host, Nikki Levante, and I am here with our final two guests of the week. Hooray, saving the best for last. Don't tell anybody else I said that. I'm here with James Naigus, who is a professor of horn at the University of Georgia. He is the creator and co-editor of the Creative Hornist Technique Tips, which is a featured column in the Horn Call. Check it out if you haven't already. And a composer of over 70 published works. And that's just one person. I'm also here with Pat Hughes. Pat Hughes is the horn professor at UT Austin. He is an international soloist and gave, fun fact is he gave the world premiere of the Asian premiere of the Makala Concerto, and is also an award-winning composer. Thank you both for being here. One of the things I really like, and the reason that I took the time to say all of those fancy things about you, because I know how great you are, but I really admire how many aspects of horn playing and aspects of just music making in general you all pursue to a really high level. I wonder how you were, I don't know, inspired or just like decided to pursue those things. I think it can be really easy to just pick a straight down the middle horn playing path and just go for that. But what kind of motivated you to venture into composition or other things like that and continue to pursue that at your respective universities?
Yeah, well, for me, it was starting early. It was encouragement from my early teachers, which, good teachers early on can really make a big difference in one's musical career or just career in general. So I had a piano teacher early on that encouraged us to compose and to just noodle. And so before knowing anything, and I just started doing it. I was 7 years old. It's like, just compose, just noodle, just do stuff. Oh, this is fun.
Yeah.
And so it started from a position of just being something that was fun, and it still is. And so, I mean, that's why I do it. It's because in addition to playing, it's just something that I enjoy. And of course, now looking at it, it's, I think, benefited my playing, and that's, I think, what we'll dive into a little bit later. But I've always just, frankly, seen composition for me and improvisation as kind of an escape from fundamentals, well, it is fundamentals, but from like playing excerpts, working on solos, and it's just been a blast. And yeah.
And like James, it was piano when I first started. And I had a teacher. She was a nun, and she was like 90, 100 million years old, and that's what it seemed. I think she may have passed by now.
I hope she's not watching. I was gonna say.
But in addition to the little things that I was working on, every week I had to bring a composition, something that I had made up. I didn't have to write it down. I just had to make something up, and she would give me parameters, like only use these keys or make it minor and sad this week or something like that. And that was so much fun. And I guess I didn't realize she was tapping into my creative abilities in music, but she must have seen it or something. So that's the thing I remember mostly. And then she also went a lot. I remember that specifically.
That's very creative.
Yeah, it's very creative.
Has that sound factored into any of your compositions?
No,
like
but that's a very good idea.
An homage piece. Next year at KBHC, I'm sure there will be a piece featuring that exact sound.
Is there a word for that sound? I don't even know.
It's called nunning.
Nunning.
You'll figure out the word by next year. That'll be.
I'll work on that. Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
Awesome.
But also then when I went to college, I actually majored in theory and composition. I really loved theory. I loved finding out how music works, and I'd heard things and I didn't know there were names for them or formulas or why one chord fit to another chord. And when I was learning theory, that was just magical to me. I'm probably the only person in the world who thought freshman theory was magical, but I was just like, what? There's a word for that? Oh my gosh. And but then I majored in composition, and I actually, so Nikki, you talked about a straight line to the horn. My line to the horn was like this, and so I came to horn much later, actually, seriously. So being creative and composing was always part of my being already, I think.
Yeah, and you both have brought that to your current studios. How do you feel like your approach and the way that you interact with your students benefits them from that creativity perspective?
Well, I think one of the greatest things about creativity in general is that so much of the educational system from just early on is there's like the two terms, convergent, divergent. The easiest way to think about it is so much what we do is there's one right answer for the question, which is just memorization. It's like, okay, there's no you in that process at all, versus divergent, which is, well, what are the possibilities? It's the ability for us to make decisions and to have ownership, and for our own personal experience and our likes and our dislikes to become part of who we are. And so in music and creativity, this gives us a chance to make our own decisions and to have fun and to make something, I think, a lot more personal, which then translates to more investment in the process and hopefully more fun. And so even just the ability for someone to say, like, you know what, you can decide what you want to do. There's a lot of power in that versus, okay, you're going to play it the exact same way that someone else played it because, and that's, I don't know, I don't have a good answer for the because it's the only way I know how to do it. I don't know. But it comes down to just the ability to be you in what you do, which sounds pretty straightforward, but I don't know. Sometimes we don't get that choice.
Well, I think most people, the way we learn horn, we're learning to recreate something. We're not actually allowed to create stuff, and we have to play the excerpts this way. We have to, there's the tradition of playing this solo or whatever, and you have to get all the articulations right, or you're not like living up to what the composer wanted, and sometimes that puts someone in a box because they just can't do that. So I like to think of, we should also be encouraging students to create at the same time so that they don't get stuck in recreations. One of the reasons why I could never learn excerpts in the beginning, because I didn't want to play them like everyone else, but I know you have to, whatever. But I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to practice that.
And I think too, part of music studies and life studies is that not everyone is going to become, principal chair in a major symphony orchestra, but so instead, what I think we both will try to do is to get people to think differently, and think creatively. And I don't know about you, if I had a doctor and I was in the OR, and I would want someone that would be able to think on their toes and think and be able to adapt, rather than, well, this is the one way to do it. This isn't the way it's supposed to go. What do I do? Right? So when we use creativity in music, depending on where they go for the rest of their lives, they're retraining their brain to just think with agency and try stuff.
Definitely. When you're talking about like fostering that creativity, this presentation is on musicality. How do you feel like those two are intertwined? How does creativity come into like the excerpts, or standard repertoire or things like that? Like, we have to be like kind of a cover band, in a way, and like do the song the way that, the Brahms orchestra did it. But at the same time, like, I think there is room for individuality in that. And how do you foster that within a more restrictive environment,
Well, I don't do it with orchestral excerpts because I think that's a place where you can be the least creative. Sure. Like you have to play the game, you have to do the thing the right way. But solo repertoire, I mean, I just think it's wide open. When I play solos or whatever these days, that if something's not working out because it's two staccatos in a row and I'm getting stuck up there and I have to play it in 2 days, throw a slur in there, I just made it my own. And I guess the regular public isn't going to care. There might be a couple horn players who are like, missed those two staccatos, but I really don't care about that either. I think once if you really want to tell a story with a piece, you have to make it your own. And one of the ways is, recognizing your strengths and your weaknesses as a player and highlighting the strengths so that you can get the music across. And so I encourage my students, to try different articulations, just try it out. Just, do you like it better? What does it sound like when you do that? Does that fit your story? All that kind of stuff. So I think with solo rep, it's actually wide open, but I think a lot of people don't think that way about solos. Like, I have to play it this way, right? But they don't. It's solo. You're a soloist.
Right. That's the way that Mozart wanted it, but Mozart's dead now. He's been dead for a long time.
And he's not going to write you an email or something.
He won't write you a nasty email. No. He can't do it. He's 6 feet under.
Yeah, exactly.
Ultimately, I think it just comes down to the flexibility of choice. So if you hear that Dennis Brain version and you really vibe with that, you like that, you have every ability to just imitate that. If as long as you have a reason, like I like this because blank. But I think, like you were saying, Pat, it also gives us the flexibility to do what we want to do, to say what we want to say. And I have the line that, who we are as a musician, and I use this for composition too, who we are as composers is a summation of our musical experience.
Right.
So when we're playing a solo, everyone, I sometimes hear people like, oh, I don't want to play Mozart because it's been played a bunch before. But yeah, but it hasn't been played by you. So you have something unique to say. You have agency in this process. So I'm curious what you have to say on this piece. In fact, I would love to hear something different just because that's a new, fresh interpretation. And frankly, it might inspire me to do something as well. But again, if you want to do something more traditional, I think just having creativity and thinking that way gives you the option to either go this way or that way, or that way, or that way, or
right into the plants.
Right into the plants. Yeah.
Yeah. How do you like start to, I feel like sometimes, especially, in a high school situation or something like that, you can kind of be like, it's easier to teach just one way to do it. And then students get to college, they're pursuing music at a higher level. How do you start to break them out of that? Get them to like think independently about music and make their own choices without saying like, well, I think you should put a crescendo here and a diminuendo here, and I think this phrase goes here. How do you get them to start making those choices on their own?
Well, I think, in Texas, I teach in Texas, and the system of Texas teaches the high school students that they do have to play an etude perfect. You have to, they have to play the trill the right way. They have to do, otherwise they're just gonna axe and they don't move on to the next round to make All-State. And so I get a lot of Texas students at UT, obviously, and they've been trained in this way. And so I do feel like I have to break that down and also break out the competitiveness that they've learned too. And
Sure.
But I don't know, maybe I'm jumping the gun, about in topics, but it's about like, some people, are they innately musical and other people not musical? Like what is that, what does that mean if you're musical or if you're not musical? And I think, if you're playing the horn and you've managed to play the horn all through high school, you probably have a little bit of musicality in you, but some teachers say that's not musical, and then people believe they're not musical, and then they never even try to do stuff like that. But I do think that everyone actually can learn to be more musical and can learn to be musical, and I just use language as an example for that usually. So, if you ask someone to tell you the plot of a movie, they're not going to say, in the first scene, the person went to the store. They'll go, in the first person. And if you just point that out, that like, how did you know to pause there? And how did you know to raise your voice or lift your voice? And you're using so many different inflections, and sometimes you're getting whispering like this just to get it through. And we all know how to do that because we know the story. And we're telling the story. We're actually retelling the story, but you're retelling it in your own words. And the fact that we can just do that, like ad lib, someone just says, "Quick, Superman, tell me the plot," or whatever. Everyone can go, "Oh yeah." And so everyone has that ability, but they don't think they do. And I think it's the same in music. You just have to like show them that they do have the ability to improvise and to put a dramatic pause or not, Or maybe run on this and talk like this just to make a point so that no one ever talks like that again, So, but I don't know. What do you think, James?
Well, to go off what you were saying, I think speaking is a really good analogy because we do it freely because it's something we're comfortable with. And we could talk about the same thing. I use the analogy with improvisation is that we improvise every day because we do it in speaking, because we know the language, which in music, the words, which would be the notes, the sentences, which would be the phrases, et cetera, et cetera. But we're so comfortable with it because we learned the general rules and the structure and then the flexibility to where, like I said, if you were to follow a contour of my voice, it's going high and low. And so what sounds robotic or inherently unmusical would be something that is monotone, even though that's a choice.
Right.
Or I'm trying to think those robotic voices that people use in those TikTok videos. It's annoying because the inflection is not
So
human.
fake, yeah.
It's so
Yeah.
wrong,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a choice to
Mhm.
make, and you could play a musical phrase in the same way that the TikTok voice does weird inflection. But that's where I guess the discussion of subjective musicality comes in, is that the
Right.
best choice? That is a choice. And then,
Right,
and
right.
so,
Yeah, I mean, speaking of like language and how we, excuse me, how we communicate phrases, I think a lot of that is from listening to other people talk and like seeing how they pause and everything like that. How can I learn that, like, for lack of a better word, like implicit language of communication with music? How do I learn what is the right thing to do and what doesn't make sense? If I started using a crazy inflection of my voice, it would be like uncanny,
Right,
to
yeah.
do that. So how do you develop that language of musical communication that feels natural? And
it's a really good question. It's kind of like a chicken or the egg situation. In a way, part of it is finding a musician or a mentor that you trust and that you like what they do, and either imitating them until you find your own version, or trusting them when you play for them, and they go, well, why don't we try, moving towards this note? But then where did they become musical? I mean, we could trace back lineage. It's impossible to know for sure. The simplest way that I like to think about musicality, and specifically phrasing, is just from here to here, where does either the energy need to go, or what do I find most interesting? And my job as a musician is to tell the audience, because I mean, we play for ourselves, but really when we perform, we're presenting something to an audience. We're saying, this is my version of this. This is what I think is interesting. So you're going along, and this note, maybe it's, and the more we study theory, the more we know it's because it's either a dissonant note, or it's a chromatic note, or it's the end of the phrase because it hits tonic. Doesn't necessarily, you don't have to know why it's interesting, but if you find it interesting, that's all the reason I need to go like, okay, well, let's emphasize that. And then there's different ways that we can emphasize notes, but at its very basic level, that's how I like to think of it. And I think that answers a lot of questions for us. As long as, and in addition to the flexibility of being willing to try a bunch of different types, so we don't get stuck
Right.
in the same way.
Experimentation. I was just going to say that was my one word answer to your question. Is like you just have to you have to create a space where you can experiment and try different things. And there is a fly. We're at camp. There's a fly. But a couple things that I've done in the past, I don't do this with every student every time, but sometimes if they're playing Mozart or something, I think people think Mozart is something that you cannot be creative. You have to play a certain way. And sadly, that's because they started using it as an audition, some part of an audition, and suddenly it becomes excerpt material rather than solo material where you can actually express yourself. So people think about just nailing it in the box. But I've had students, I give them a Mozart, an edition that has hardly anything on it, and then if there's any articulations, I have them, well, in the good old days, we would white it out, and then you make a copy, and then assign them to go listen to 4 different people playing that movement, and to write in the articulations and the phrasing that you hear them doing. And it becomes very clear that not everyone is doing it the same, but they all sound pretty great. And so then I have them decide which ones of those 4 things, which parts of this one and that one do they like, and why do they like it? And then it kind of becomes their own edition. And then that's one step, and I think that the other thing I was thinking about in terms of what we were talking about right here was that when a student comes up to perform, they're even though they practice it really hard and they haven't thought much about the performance, usually their intent is to play all the right notes and not embarrass themselves and get the heck off stage. That's their intent. And I think with really great performers, the right notes or whatever aren't as important as really communicating a story or communicating some thoughts or trying to make the audience feel something, make them cry, make them angry because the music is weird or whatever. But that makes performance more interesting. And if you can get past that with the notes, with learning the notes and everything. And it's hard to do that with students because we're trying to move them through repertoire. So sometimes you never get a chance to actually get as far as that. And but I think that should be the ultimate goal. If you just remind them it's about it's about them, not about you. And it's about the piece. It's about the music itself.
And it's interesting you mentioned that like something like Mozart gets limiting because it's in an audition type of situation. But in every interview that I've watched with top orchestral players and soloists, and you'll have a Mozart as your first round piece.
Right.
I think the assumption is that at a certain point, everyone's going to come in with the right notes in the right time. So what sets people apart besides sound, which is, I would say, part of musicality, frankly.
Right.
It's not just phrasing, it's also your sound production and your color, but that's it. So that's the difference. So it's, if you think of playing Mozart devoid of musicality, which no one would ever, I think, intentionally make that choice, you're not going to probably advance, because there'll be someone that'll be making a statement,
Right.
shaping color, doing something, adding something to it,
Right.
that is alluring.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. I feel, excuse me, even, moving out of the student realm, it can be sometimes hard to break out of that,
Mm-hmm.
that like, it almost feels like a straitjacket, of like, okay, I can be musical, but I need to be musical in order to get the job, but I can't do too much. Or what if somebody doesn't like the thing that I do? And I am wondering, it's a interesting question. It's a tough question. How do you find that balance between like being creative and taking chances and making it your own voice without offending someone? And while everybody's a critic, nobody's ever going to like everything that you do. How do you find that you can balance that with like being distasteful,
That's a really good question, because it's
Sorry.
purely, subjectivity. And I don't know why I was immediately drawn to like modern art, where I can go to a modern art museum and look at something on the wall and instantaneously, subjectively think, wow, this is ugly, right? For lack of a better word. But that's because that's based on my experience, my own personal choices. But then I'll take a second and think like, okay, well, why did they make the choices that they made? Okay, I understand it a little better. And maybe because of that, maybe I'll try doing that.
Mhm.
I mean, not art, because I can barely draw a stick figure, but
Sometimes that's all you need,
yeah. But taste in music, I mean, that is a very subjective thing, which is where I come back to finding a mentor that you trust that'll help guide you in terms of knowing where those levels are. But as Pat said, just experimenting, and you won't know what the boundaries are unless you start pushing them in terms of time, in terms of color. And so recording yourself, listening back is huge, because oftentimes when we're playing, we're so visual focused and we close our ears, we don't actually hear what we're doing. And or recording yourself in a hall space versus a small little room, which we don't get the full picture of our own sound, our articulation, our color, all of this stuff. So having either another set of ears, or just really just listening to our own playing and being both subjective and objective, and having the humility to try a bunch of stuff and even just do crazy, wacky stuff, just also for fun, to break free. Because sometimes I don't know, if you play the exposition of Mozart and you swing it a little bit, maybe you'll find something in there that could be interesting,
Right.
a new approach.
Yeah. I like to have my students practice in pairs too, and play for each other all the time, because you can get an immediate, just by watching someone's face while you play, if that, like, oh, maybe that was too loud, you know what I mean? And you can kind of get a general, I mean, of course, it's subjective to what they're thinking, but it's another way of getting some sort of feedback and trying, experimenting, stay in a safe space and everything. I don't know, if someone is in the audience and is mad because I missed those, I didn't play those 2 notes staccato, I'm sorry, I'm not gonna go out of my way to take him out for a drink or or something like that. But it's like, come on, let the music happen. And I mean, I think in the end, we're not only playing for musicians and other horn players, we're playing for a general public that just loves the sound of the horn. And so, I can't remember where I was going with that. Was I close?
You
I
were
don't know.
close.
It's
Yeah, you were close. How, if you have, like, talking about all of this, talking about like practicing in pairs or doing a lot of listening, like for recordings and things like that, how else can students at home, the people in the audience right now, our viewers at home, how can they start to incorporate musicality today? How can they start to work on that and find their voice, find what they're interested in saying about a piece, if they don't have that expert help ready to go.
Imitations, well, they say imitation is the greatest form of flattery. I don't know if that necessarily applies to this, but find something you like, find a recording you like, and like you were saying, mark in exactly how they do it, copy that until that becomes innate. I mean, with phrasing, I think there's a certain kind of, we can be pedantic about it at first, like, okay, how do we have rubato? Well, you're gonna hold this note, think of this note instead of a quarter as a dotted quarter, put a tenuto on this, you're gonna come away from that. Like, it can be very mechanical at first, but then also people learn differently. So some people you can just sing a phrase, or you're saying like, how do you want to do this by singing it? Okay, do that on the horn, or writing out every little notch with the idea that if you do that enough, it starts to become innate, and you need to be less, like I said, prescriptive about it, and it'll just start happening, and you can make those choices. And whether you explain why something sounds the way it does, or you just do it, I don't know if it really matters unless you want to teach it later. But
that makes sense, and
yeah.
to me, totally. And the other thing I was going to say is that I don't think people do this very often, but I mean, every teacher says, you just sing it, you know, we all say that, you know, but it's kind of funny or fun, I guess, to have someone sing it and record them singing it, and don't have them sing it not looking at the music. You know, like the opening part of Strauss, like everyone knows how that goes forever, ever. So you just have them sing it, and on whatever syllables happen to come to them, you know, ba da da, you know, however, and then listen to, because it's so easy to do that with your voice, you know, and sing it with gusto, you can say, or like sing it with feeling or something, and then actually pay attention to how the different syllables that you're using, and where you actually got loud and where you got soft, and you're like, you don't even realize you're doing it. It's because if you tell someone to sing that, they're not going to go, they're not, you know, they're just not going to do that.
That would be a choice.
Then maybe they should try English as a major. No, just kidding. But I don't know. And recording your voice and listening to what you naturally do, I think, is a really kind of a cool way to discover your articulation or how you want to phrase something.
You bring up a really good point with just the getting away from the page, right? Because I think we can get really caught up in the visual. And I think we can both speak as composers the fact that music notation is limiting, right?
Yes.
Music notation is a way of expressing some musical intent. But if you even think about the aspect that notes are separated by space on a page, but they're not separated by space when we're playing it, right? So right off the bat, you can see something, or you see a line break, and all of a sudden your energy dips from here to here just because your eye is going there. So a lot of people read the ink, I think, too literally, and thinking that this is exactly what Mozart wanted. He wanted me to play this in exact time. No, you know, there are some compositions, sure, that is so prescriptive and so meticulous that we need specific decibel levels for each note. That's fine. I'm not interested as much in that music personally. But right. So I mean, just thinking that this is a guideline for the musical intent, but like we need to fill in the gaps.
Or I've written pieces where like I know exactly how I want it to sound, and so I think this is the appropriate articulation to put to make it sound like that. And then I workshop all of my pieces with my horn choir, and then they're like interpreting that, and it doesn't sound anything like what I thought. And I thought, oh, and I thought, why did I use that articulation? Like, well, for me, that meant to do that, you know. And so then that makes you question all of articulation. And I had a colleague at University of Texas. She was a piano professor, and she did a study on articulations and how, like, the staccato. She went and recorded brass, woodwinds, strings, pianos, all different people, and how they interpreted the staccato and what staccato meant to different instruments. And it was like a whole palette, you know, a staccato was and so then that makes you think, so maybe articulations, I mean, I don't know. They don't have to be exactly what is on the page, you know? Go here. Whatever you're doing, go here. Don't play the actual thing to make it go there. Go there and find out what you needed to do to get there.
This has been really awesome. Thank you guys for all your thoughts and all your ideas, and I hope all of you at home are as inspired as I am. I'm ready to go practice some Mozart right now. I don't know that I've ever said that in my life, so this is a big deal for me. Thank you guys. Thank you everyone for being here, our live studio audience. You guys were great, and thanks again for joining us online. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Thank you for joining us for our entire Horn Camp Connect series. I hope you loved the new format. Let us know if you did in the comments. And thank you guys again for joining. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.